Kristen Rossum's situation is a poignant example of potential unfulfilled. Once a promising chemistry graduate from San Diego State University, she had the opportunity to pursue a career in science. However, she opted for a different trajectory. Currently, she is serving a life sentence at the Central California Women's Facility for a crime committed against her husband, Ralph. Kristen and Constance Rossum were parents to 3 children, whom they were diligently preparing for a prosperous future. The children received education from prestigious institutions, were tutored, and engaged in various clubs aimed at nurturing their talents. Unfortunately, Kristen's fragile and impulsive nature led her to struggle with the pressures of maintaining an ideal life. In her quest for escape, she resorted to lying and skipping classes, initially finding solace in alcohol. However, as time passed, alcohol ceased to provide the relief she sought, leading her to develop a dependency on methamphetamine. This substance, known for being one of the most addictive illicit drugs in the United States, induces paranoia, distorts judgment, and can result in euphoria and hallucinations. Kristen's increasingly erratic behavior and disconnection from reality raised concerns for her parents. After a lengthy discussion, she confessed to her addiction, which had begun in high school. This revelation was particularly devastating for a family of educated professionals. Following several months of conflict with her parents, 17-year-old Kristen made the decision to secretly flee to Mexico with friends for a holiday. A chance encounter led her to a tall and handsome man named Gregory DeVette, who was 7 years her senior. He appeared to be an angel destined to rescue her, and indeed, he did. Greg fell for the troubled woman, assuming a parental role and taking on the responsibility for her well-being. With his support, she secured a position as a toxicology assistant in a local forensic department, where her skills impressed her employer. Her past struggles with addiction faded into the background, which proved advantageous, as her job in toxicology granted her access to seized controlled substances. Kristen graduated from university with honors, earning accolades from her teachers and employer, who presented her with the Best Student Award, oblivious to the underlying reasons for her passion for the field. Her relationship with Greg spanned approximately 5 years, culminating in a grand wedding on June 5, 1999. Kristen's parents cherished Greg, feeling reassured that their daughter had emerged from the depths of dependency and was confidently navigating a path toward a promising and fulfilling life. In March 2000, she was employed by the San Diego County Medical Examiner's Office as a toxicologist, a role that involved analyzing body fluids to identify controlled substances. At that time, Gregory was working in the biotechnology sector. However, Kristen soon grew weary of her monotonous existence and began to seek excitement elsewhere. She found it in a new colleague, Michael Robertson, who had recently been appointed as the department head. Despite being married, their sudden attraction could not be concealed for long, and Greg eventually discovered numerous letters exchanged between them. The relationship between Gregory and Kristen had significantly deteriorated, yet Gregory remained hopeful about salvaging their marriage, fully aware of his wife's vulnerabilities. However, Kristen was resolute in her decision to end their union, demanding a divorce on the morning of Monday, November 6, 2000. As she prepared for work, Gregory, who was unwell, stayed home. Concerned for her husband following their recent discussion about separation, Kristen informed his employer of his illness and made a point to visit him during her lunch break. Later that evening, at 9:22 p.m., Kristen called emergency services to report that Gregory was not breathing, suspecting he had taken his own life while alone at home. Overcome with emotion, she struggled to follow the dispatcher's instructions regarding the examination of the body and the potential for administering first aid. When police and paramedics arrived at 10:19 p.m., they pronounced Gregory dead at the scene. He was found on the bedroom floor, his torso exposed and surrounded by scattered rose petals. An examination of the room indicated that he had likely ingested a fatal combination of various controlled substances, with empty vials of potent painkillers strewn about and torn wedding photographs discovered on the bed. During the subsequent interrogation, Kristen revealed that she had informed Gregory of their separation the night before, just 17 months after their wedding, expressing her regret over the hasty decision to marry. Greg exhibited excessive clinginess, prompting her to seek distance from him. Following his death, which was classified as a suicide, it was determined that strong sedative drugs were involved. Kristen signed the cremation documents. However, Gregory's family and friends were skeptical of the sudden nature of his suicide, as none had observed any significant changes in his demeanor or mood. He had not confided in anyone regarding his marital difficulties. Greg had a strong aversion to controlled substances, making it unlikely that he would have willingly consumed them. Eventually, his relatives succeeded in halting the cremation and demanded an independent autopsy. Their determination led to the exploration of a homicide theory. Toxicological analyses soon revealed that Gregory's system contained an extraordinarily high concentration of fentanyl, a painkiller 150 times more potent than morphine, along with smaller quantities of clonazepam and trace amounts of oxycodone, often referred to as hillbilly heroin. Investigators theorized that, under the influence of clonazepam and other detected substances, someone else may have administered the fatal dose of fentanyl to Gregory. Kristen emerged as the primary suspect, given that fentanyl is not available over the counter and she had significant knowledge and access to such medications. Upon her arrival for questioning at the police station, her gaunt and unkempt appearance, coupled with her erratic behavior, suggested a dependency on drugs. This was further corroborated by her own statements regarding the day of Gregory's death, where she displayed inconsistencies. Initially, Kristen informed paramedics that Gregory had not taken any medication, but later altered her account to imply that he might have. At the hospital, Kristen informed a nurse that Gregory may have experienced an overdose of oxycodone. Oxycodone, which has effects akin to those of opioid drugs, not only alleviates pain but can also create feelings of euphoria. It suppresses the respiratory system, and without prompt intervention, its use can lead to fatal consequences. The police considered the possibility that Gregory's death resulted from an accidental overdose involving cold medication and oxycodone. In discussions with Kristen, they discovered that Gregory was deeply troubled by their deteriorating marriage, prompting Kristen to suggest to the police that he may have taken his own life. This led to another line of inquiry for the investigators. On November 8th, a colleague of Kristen's, Russ Lowe, contacted the police to disclose information regarding Kristen's affair with her supervisor. This revelation altered the direction of the investigation. Evidence of Kristen's relationship with Dr. Robertson was uncovered, including passionate emails and professional documents that highlighted Dr. Robertson's expertise in pharmaceuticals. The pieces of the criminal puzzle were aligning. It was suspected that Gregory posed a threat to the couple, as he was aware of Kristen's illicit use of controlled substances, facilitated by Michael, who was allegedly protecting her. The crime appeared to be premeditated, and the investigators faced the challenge of substantiating this theory. During questioning, Michael Robertson admitted to being aware of Kristen's drug dependency. However, no charges were filed against either individual, and both were subsequently terminated from their positions for breaching multiple regulations. In January, serious legal issues for Kristen began when law enforcement executed a search warrant at her residence, uncovering evidence of drug use and related paraphernalia. This led to her initial arrest, although she was subsequently released on bail. As the investigation unfolded, new details came to light, including Kristen's diary. Preliminary analysis suggested that the diary was not intended for her personal reflection but rather crafted for an external audience, potentially to obscure her involvement and to project an image of Gregory's seemingly self-inflicted demise. On the day of her husband's death, she purchased a rose and donned revealing lingerie, actions that appeared inconsistent with her claimed distress. Medical examinations revealed that Gregory had been unconscious for a minimum of 6 hours prior to his death, which may have occurred 1 to 1.5 hours before it was officially recorded. Furthermore, a bruise was discovered at the site of a needle injection on Gregory's arm, the significance of which remained unclear. At Kristen's workplace, a shortage of the drug implicated in Gregory's death, along with other controlled substances, was identified. Authorities suspected that Kristen had poisoned Gregory by administering fentanyl without his consent. The prosecution's case was built on toxicological and medical evidence, leading to Kristen's arrest on June 25, 2001, on charges of first-degree murder. After spending 6 months in custody, she was released on bail, and the first trial commenced. The prosecution's primary argument centered on the motive for the alleged homicide, asserting that Kristen killed Gregory due to his threats to damage her reputation. The prosecution alleged that Kristen's reputation as a good girl was tarnished by her renewed drug use and an affair with Michael Robertson. They contended that she poisoned Gregory with fentanyl, a potent synthetic opioid that is 80 times more powerful than morphine. It was suggested that she initially attempted to end his life using clonazepam, and upon its failure, resorted to administering fentanyl. Furthermore, the prosecution argued that she staged the scene in the bedroom to make it appear as though Gregory had taken his own life, tearing pages from her diary and arranging rose petals and a wedding photograph around his body. The court was informed that Kristen, who holds a degree in biochemistry, utilized her expertise in drugs and chemistry to orchestrate Gregory's demise. The prosecution also asserted that Kristen aimed to persuade her colleagues at the medical examiner's office that Gregory's death was a suicide, concealing information regarding the fentanyl. However, before an autopsy could be performed, she was reassigned to another laboratory, and her attempt to manipulate toxicological findings proved unsuccessful. The prosecution presented evidence of Kristen's actions on November 6, noting that early in the morning, she contacted Gregory's employer to report his absence before proceeding to work. Her colleagues testified that approximately an hour after her arrival, around 9:00 a.m., she was observed crying in Michael's office. Additionally, the apartment building manager, where Kristen and Gregory resided, reported seeing her return home. At 12:10 p.m. and again at 12:41 p.m., she visited a nearby grocery store where she acquired several items, including a single red rose. Credit card statements corroborate this information. Hours prior to Gregory's death, she made numerous calls to Michael. Dr. Brian Blackburn, the San Diego County medical examiner who performed Gregory's autopsy, testified that Gregory had been deceased for at least an hour before the paramedics arrived. He informed the court that Gregory had developed early bronchopneumonia, a condition that occurs when secretions that are typically expelled through breathing accumulate in the lungs due to a person's unconscious state or insufficient deep breathing. Dr. Blackburn also noted that Gregory's bladder contained a considerable amount of urine, which would have caused significant discomfort had he been conscious. This led Dr. Blackburn to conclude that Gregory had been experiencing poor breathing for approximately 6 to 12 hours prior to his death. An unconscious individual would not be capable of sprinkling rose petals over themselves. Dr. Blackburn indicated that the level of clonazepam found in Gregory's blood was not at a lethal overdose level. Dr. Theodore Stanley testified for the prosecution, explaining that fentanyl is a powerful and rapidly acting pain reliever with serious side effects that can result in respiratory arrest. Dr. Stanley stated that the onset of fentanyl's effects varies based on the method of administration, with peak effects occurring approximately 16 hours after applying a transdermal patch, 20 to 30 minutes following oral ingestion, and 15 to 20 minutes after other methods. Intramuscular injection and within 5 minutes following intravenous injection, Dr. Stanley informed the court that fentanyl is typically not administered orally due to the liver metabolizing approximately 65% of it, resulting in only 35% entering the bloodstream. When questioned about how fentanyl entered Gregory's system, neither Dr. Blackburn nor Dr. Stanley could provide a conclusive opinion. Dr. Stanley presented evidence of varying concentration levels of fentanyl in Gregory's body, along with data indicating that Gregory was unconscious and exhibiting shallow breathing for several hours prior to his death. This suggests that fentanyl was likely administered to Gregory on multiple occasions. The prosecution was unable to definitively explain how Kristen poisoned Gregory, but there were indications that she may have applied fentanyl patches to his arm while he was asleep. The disappearance of 15 patches from the laboratory where Kristen previously worked lent credence to this theory. The defense maintained Kristen's innocence, acknowledging that fentanyl was the cause of Gregory's death but asserting that he self-administered it intentionally, driven by despair over family matters. Kristen testified in court, recounting that on the morning of November 6th, she awoke to find Gregory in distress. She contacted his employer at 7:42 a.m. to report his illness and that he would not be attending work. She stated that she went to work but later returned to the apartment to check on Gregory, having lunch with him after noon. During her testimony, she inquired about Gregory's distress that morning, to which he responded that he was not feeling well. Gregory had consumed oxycodone and clonazepam, intending to remain at home and rest. I departed for work at approximately 2:30 in the afternoon. During my lunch break, I returned home to check on Gregory, and we shared a meal before I went back to work. I arrived home around 8:00 in the evening to find Gregory lying on the bed, and I initially assumed he was asleep. After taking a bath, I attempted to wake him, only to discover that he was cold. I immediately contacted emergency services. During the trial, the prosecutor rigorously cross-examined Kristen, labeling her explanation as peculiar. She acknowledged having lied previously, including about her drug use. The prosecutor informed the court that fentanyl was an ideal poison due to its difficulty in detection, a fact she was well aware of from her professional background. Medical testimony derived from the autopsy and toxicological analysis indicated that Gregory had been unconscious for approximately 6 to 8 hours, which contradicted Kristen's claim of having lunch with him that day. The defense argued that while Dr. Blackburn indicated that the clonazepam level in Gregory's blood was not lethal, the combination of oxycodone, an opioid, and clonazepam, a benzodiazepine, could produce a synergistic effect, enhancing their potency. They proposed that Gregory might have inadvertently ingested the drugs himself. However, the method of fentanyl administration and the reason for the elevated levels in his system remained unclear. After 8 hours of deliberation, the jury found Kristen guilty of first-degree homicide and special circumstances homicide due to the use of poison. She received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Kristen continued to assert her innocence and appealed the verdict, claiming that her defense team had made significant errors. Lawyers acknowledged that fentanyl was responsible for the death, however, they neglected to conduct tests on the autopsy samples for fentanyl metabolites. Such testing could have clarified whether Gregory ingested fentanyl or if the fentanyl present in the samples resulted from contamination in the laboratory after his demise. If fentanyl had only been identified in the samples and not in Gregory's body, the prosecution's assertion that fentanyl caused his death would have been erroneous. The appellate court was informed of a break in the chain of custody concerning the samples, which were stored in a cardboard box labeled as containing samples from Gregory's body, yet the containers were not sealed. These samples were intended for immediate transfer to an external laboratory via the sheriff's office, however, the designated recipient was unavailable, resulting in the box remaining at the medical examiner's office for approximately 36 hours before being sent to the sheriff's forensic lab. The argument presented to the appellate court suggested that anyone with access to the medical examiner's office could have tampered with the samples, potentially adding fentanyl to them. Kristen posited that there was a motive to manipulate the samples and implicate her in the crime, stemming from various personal dynamics and tensions among the staff. Indeed, Kristen contended in the appellate court that on November 8, 2000, Michael had informed one of the toxicologists about examining a sample of Gregory's stomach contents. The three-judge panel of the 9th U South Circuit Court of Appeals determined that Kristen's legal representatives made an error in their approach. The defense contested the prosecution's assertion that her husband succumbed to a fentanyl overdose, arguing that her legal representatives should have conducted tests on the autopsy samples for fentanyl metabolites instead of simply accepting the cause of death. Although the verdict was not overturned, the case was remanded to federal court to assess whether this oversight in defense could have influenced the trial's outcome. Following this ruling, the U.S. Supreme Court determined that federal courts are required to respect the decisions made by state courts in such appeals. Consequently, the appellate court declined to hold a hearing regarding Kristen's case, resulting in the denial of her appeal and her continued detention. Michael Robertson was identified as an accomplice during Kristen's trial, leading authorities to file a criminal conspiracy complaint discreetly and to issue a sealed warrant for his arrest. Robertson, who is both the former employer and romantic partner of convicted offender Kristen Rossum, currently resides in Australia as a forensic toxicology consultant. Should he return to the United States, he could face arrest and a bail set at $100,000. Additionally, Gregory's family initiated a lawsuit against the county, alleging negligence that permitted Kristen to illicitly obtain a lethal quantity of drugs from the medical examiner's office without detection. In 2006, a U.S. court awarded them $147 million in civil damages in a case that captured national attention. Rossum, a former toxicologist at the county medical examiner's office, was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole in February 2003 for stealing drugs from the laboratory and using them to poison her husband, Gregory DeVere, while staging a suicide scene in their apartment, complete with rose petals scattered around his body. Thank you for your attention.